The storm arrived long before anyone was ready for it. Rain hammered against the windows of the Night Owl Diner with a force that made the neon sign outside shudder in its frame. At 2 a.m., the city felt emptied out, like it had pulled a blanket of darkness over itself and decided to sleep through whatever was coming. Inside that small diner, however, one routine remained unbroken. Elena lifted the last slice of meatloaf from the warming tray, steam rising into the faint glow of the fluorescent lights. She didn't reach for the stack of plastic plates beside her hand. Instead, she bent down and pulled out the item she kept hidden away from customers, the porcelain plate with fading blue roses along the rim. She placed the meatloaf on it, steady and deliberate. No rush, no shortcuts. Every night at this exact hour she did the same thing. Not because anyone asked, but because one man deserved, at the very least, to feel human. She carried the plate toward the corner booth where Arthur sat slumped forward, layers of damp fabric wrapped around a body that had endured far too many winters. The storm had soaked him through before he'd even reached the door. "Elena," he whispered when he sensed her approach, though he didn't lift his head. "It's here," she said. "Eat while it's warm." Arthur blinked, trying to focus. He stared at the porcelain plate for a long moment, long enough that the look in his eyes softened, as if something familiar stirred in him. Then his voice cracked through the quiet. "Smells good." Elena nodded. She adjusted the napkin under his elbow so the plate wouldn't slide. A small gesture, but enough to give him dignity on a night when even staying upright was a battle. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She checked it quickly. "Rent will increase by 15% next month. Please confirm." The number at the top of her banking app still read the same, $42.50. Enough for groceries, barely enough for gas, nowhere near enough for anything beyond survival. She put the phone away. One crisis at a time. When she turned back toward the counter, the diner door swung open with a loud groan. A man stepped inside, breathing hard, rainwater dripping from every inch of him. He didn't carry an umbrella. He didn't wear a coat thick enough for the storm. All he had was a stack of soaked flyers clenched so tightly in his hand the paper had begun to tear. His eyes scanned the diner, not for an empty table, not for a menu, but for a face. A face he clearly didn't find. He let out a breath that trembled, whether from cold or something deeper. Elena couldn't tell. He took a seat at the counter. Elena approached him with a fresh mug of coffee. He looked up briefly, startled by her presence, as if he'd forgotten the world still had people in it. "You should have something warm," she said. He didn't argue. "Thank you," he replied, his voice raw from the cold, or from searching for something he was losing hope of finding. As he lifted the mug with shaking hands, the flyers in his lap shifted. A face stared up from the wet paper. An older man, silver hair, eyes that once held authority but now looked lost. Elena glanced at Arthur instinctively. The stranger followed her gaze. The moment his eyes landed on Arthur, something inside him tightened. Recognition? Hope? Fear? It flickered across his expression too fast to decipher. But then he looked away, jaw setting with the kind of resignation only someone who has searched too long understands. He folded the flyers slowly, carefully, like he couldn't bring himself to throw away the last piece of someone. Elena didn't ask questions. Diner regulars had taught her long ago that the worst nights often came with the quietest words. She stepped back behind the counter and was reaching for the coffee pot when the door slammed once more. 3 young men staggered inside, loud with alcohol and careless energy. They didn't notice the soaked stranger at the counter. They didn't notice Elena, but they saw Arthur. "Man, look at this guy," one said. "Did he fall asleep on the sidewalk and roll in here?" Another tossed a crumpled napkin that bounced off Arthur's shoulder. Something in the air shifted. The stranger at the counter straightened, his fingers curling into a fist. But Elena moved first. She walked away from the counter with purpose. Not rushed, not fearful, just certain. The coffee pot stayed in her hand only because she still needed it for actual customers. "That's enough," she said. Her voice wasn't raised, but it carried a weight that made all 3 men stop talking. "This diner is closed for you. Leave." They hesitated, confused that anyone would confront them at this hour. But Elena didn't step back, didn't look away, didn't let them disrespect what had become a sanctuary for people who had nowhere left to go. After a few muttered swears, the men turned and shoved the door open again, disappearing into the storm. The diner fell quiet. Only the rain answered. Elena turned back toward the counter. The stranger was staring at her, not with pity, not with surprise, but with something steadier, something that recognized strength. "You handled that well," he said quietly. "I've dealt with worse," she replied. "People come here at 2 a.m. for all kinds of reasons." He looked down into his coffee. "Some of us more than others," he whispered. Behind them, Arthur coughed softly, the sound ragged but steady. The stranger's eyes flicked toward him again, lingering longer this time. Elena noticed the tension in his face. Something unsaid hung between him and the old man in the corner, even though neither of them spoke a word to the other. Outside, the storm showed no sign of stopping. Inside, 3 lives, each carrying their own storm, sat within a few feet of one another, unaware that before the night ended, their stories would collide in ways none of them could foresee. This was the night everything quietly began to change. For the next few nights, the storm didn't let up. Wind rattled the windows of the Night Owl diner, and rainwater clung to the sidewalks like a second skin. Yet every night, near the same late hour, the stranger returned. He walked in quietly, carrying exhaustion in his shoulders and a tension he no longer tried to hide. But he introduced himself with a simple name, Julian. Nothing more. Elena didn't ask why he came back, but she noticed he always sat facing Arthur's booth. She noticed the way his gaze lingered, searching for something he couldn't fully admit. And she noticed the nights when the weight in his expression grew heavier, like time was working against him in some invisible way. He told her he was a freelance consultant. Work unstable, hours unpredictable. The story fit his worn-out eyes and late-night patterns. It fit his clothes that looked expensive once, but were now exhausted from sleepless days. But Elena had worked in a diner long enough to recognize when someone hid behind a half-truth. Still, he tried. Every night, he tried to look like someone just trying to get through life the quiet way. Sometimes he arrived earlier and helped her restock sugar jars without being asked. Sometimes he sat in silence, observing the diner like he was trying to understand the world from inside it. And sometimes they talked. Not about life-changing things. Just small fragments of who they were beneath the exhaustion. One night, as she wiped the counter, Julian watched the storm smear the city lights across the window and said, "This place feels steady, even on nights when nothing else is." Elena didn't reply immediately. Compliments had a way of feeling suspicious when life kept disappointing her. But she said, "People only end up here at this hour when they're looking for something." Julian nodded. His eyes shifted toward Arthur. "Some of us," he said, "are looking for someone." The way he said it made her pause. Before she could ask more, Arthur stirred in his booth. His spoon fell, clattering loud in the quiet diner. Elena rushed to him first, steadying the plate, steadying his hands. "You're okay," she whispered. "It's just a nightmare again." Arthur's breath shook. He muttered disjointed pieces of memories, old business terms, half-finished sentences, numbers, and words from decades ago. Julian's chair scraped against the floor as he stood, but he froze halfway, unsure whether he should step forward or stay back. Elena noticed. "Night terrors," she explained softly. "They come and go." "What does he remember?" Julian asked. "Random things," she said. "Business, papers, something from the 80s. Nothing consistent." Arthur thumped the table suddenly, a sharp sound that made the lights shiver. "No, I said no. He's not ready. Julian isn't ready." Elena flinched. Julian's entire body locked still. When she looked at him, his eyes were filled with something painful. Recognition, fear, longing. But before he could move, Arthur collapsed back into his booth, exhausted. Elena stroked the old man's jacket sleeve. "He dreams about a son," she said quietly, "someone he thinks abandoned him." Julian swallowed hard. His voice was steady, but his hands weren't. "Not all sons walk away," he said. "Some just lose the path to where their fathers ended up." Elena nodded, accepting the statement at face value. But the way he said it left a thin thread of tension in the air, the kind that hinted at truths he hadn't yet shared. Days passed. The storm finally broke, but the cold stayed. On a Friday evening, after the dinner rush faded and only 2 booths remained occupied, Elena returned from the back hallway with frustration clouding her face. Her car, old, worn, stubborn, had finally died in the lot after work the previous morning. She told herself she wouldn't let the stress show. But Julian noticed. "You okay?" he asked as she placed a fresh pot of coffee on the burner. Elena forced a smile. "Just a car problem." "The kind that needs a jump?" Julian asked. "Or the kind that needs a miracle?" "A miracle," she admitted, rubbing tiredness from her face. "It won't start. And if I can't get to my shift tomorrow, Rick will replace me in a heartbeat." "I can take a look," Julian offered. "I know old engines. I fix mine all the time." She lifted a brow. "A consultant who fixes cars?" He exhaled, realizing he'd made a crack in his own cover. "Let's just say, I used to rebuild things when life was simpler." Elena shook her head. "I appreciate it, but no. Customers and employees don't mix favors. It gets complicated." "Then call it a neighbor helping another neighbor," he tried. She smiled, tired, grateful, but bound by pride. "I can't owe anyone right now, especially someone who already tips too much." Julian didn't press the issue, but the look on his face made it clear he wished she'd let him help. A week later, the storm returned, but this time the wind carried more than rain. It carried trouble. When Elena arrived for her shift, she heard raised voices in the stocking room. Moments later, Rick, the diner's manager, stepped out with irritation carved across his features. "Get him out," Rick barked, pointing toward Arthur's booth. "There's a sanitation inspection next week. I won't have that man sleeping here. Customers complain." Elena stepped between Rick and Arthur's booth before she even realized her feet had moved. "He's harmless," she argued. "He eats, he sits quietly, he doesn't bother anyone." "He bothers me," Rick snapped. "And he hurts our grade. I'm not losing my job over your charity case." "He's a human being, Rick scoffed. "He's bad for business." Before she could respond, Rick grabbed Arthur's sleeve. Arthur jolted awake, panic rushing through his fogged mind. "No, don't take me." "Stop!" Elena's voice cracked through the diner. "Let him go." But Rick dragged Arthur toward the door anyway, forcing the old man into the storm outside. Arthur stumbled into the rain, the door shutting behind him. Elena's chest tightened, her throat burned. "Rick, what the hell is wrong with you?" she demanded. "If he wants dinner, he can come back when the inspector's gone," Rick said. "We run a business, not a shelter." Elena knew she couldn't win against him. Not when her job was already hanging by a thread. Not when she had $42.50 to her name. But that didn't make the ache in her chest any lighter. The next night, Arthur didn't come. The booth stayed empty. The porcelain plate stayed hidden. The diner felt wrong, like a song missing notes. Elena checked the sidewalks on her break. Nothing. By midnight, she made the decision she'd avoided all week. She called Julian. When he answered on the second ring, she didn't waste time. "Arthur's missing," she said. Her voice betrayed her panic. "I'm coming," Julian replied instantly. He arrived faster than she expected, not on foot like he claimed he usually traveled, but in a large, dark SUV parked half a block away. He didn't explain. She didn't question it. All that mattered was finding Arthur. They searched alleyways, sidewalk benches, underpasses, doorways where the city hid its forgotten. Julian stayed close but let her lead. Every time she called Arthur's name into the storm, he studied her. Not the streets. He saw the urgency in her steps, the tremble in her breath. "You care about him," Julian said softly. "He's the only person who ever trusted me without asking for anything," she replied. "And now he's alone out here." Julian didn't answer, but he quickened his pace beside her. Until finally, in a narrow alley near a shuttered laundromat, they found a collapsed shadow slumped beside a dumpster. "Elena," Julian whispered. "That's him." Arthur was burning with fever, coat soaked through, breath shallow and uneven. Without hesitation, Julian lifted the old man onto his back as if he weighed nothing. "Open your car," he said. Elena fumbled with her keys, hands shaking. The engine coughed as Julian placed Arthur gently into the back seat. "We're taking him to the hospital," Julian said. "Now." And for the first time since she met him, Elena saw something in Julian's face that hadn't been there before. Determination, fear, and something that looked painfully close to love. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fluorescent lights. It was past 3 in the morning when Elena pushed Arthur's wheelchair through the double doors. His breathing was shallow, his skin hot under layers of soaked fabric. The nurses barely glanced up. "Insurance?" one asked without looking away from her clipboard. "He needs help," Elena said. "Please." Insurance first, the nurse repeated. The words hit her like a wall she didn't have the strength to climb. She pulled out everything she had, crumpled bills, coins, and eventually the small gold watch she kept tucked inside her apron. A watch her father left her before he died. The last thing she owned that felt like a connection to where she came from. She set it on the desk. "Take it," she said, voice trembling. "Do whatever this gets him. Just help him." The nurse looked at the watch, then at the pile of coins, finally recognizing the desperation behind it. Before she could reach for the tray, Julian stepped forward. "Admit him under emergency provisions," he said. His tone was low, steady, different from the quiet, gentle version she'd seen in the diner. "We can't." He pulled out his phone. "Call your director," Julian said. "Now, tell them Sterling is here." Something shifted instantly in the nurse's face. Recognition, fear, obligation. Within seconds, Arthur was rushed inside. Elena watched the door swing closed, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. Julian finally exhaled, shoulders dropping as if he'd been carrying a weight he could no longer hide. She looked at him, really looked. The SUV, the way the staff reacted, the things he never said. "Julian," she whispered. "Who are you?" He didn't answer. Not yet. They waited in the corridor for hours. Elena couldn't sit still. Julian sat quietly, elbows on his knees, hands clasped, watching her pace like someone memorizing grief in real time. Finally, a doctor approached them. "He's still unconscious," the doctor explained. "Severe fever, possible complications from exposure. We're doing everything we can." "Will he?" Elena couldn't finish the question. "We don't know yet," the doctor said gently. She nodded, swallowing back a wave of fear. When the doctor left, Julian stood. "Elena," he said softly, "there's something I have to tell you." Her exhaustion didn't leave room for anger. Only truth. He took a breath. "My name is Julian Sterling." The name landed between them like a dropped blade. "The Sterling?" she asked quietly. "The company with the tower downtown?" He nodded. She closed her eyes for a moment, not out of fear, but because pieces of the last weeks suddenly rearranged themselves into a picture she didn't want to see. "Those flyers," she whispered. "The man you were searching for." Julian looked toward the ICU doors. "He disappeared 8 months ago," he said. "He walked out of a board meeting, wandered into the city, and never came back. No phone, no wallet, nothing. I searched everywhere." He ran a hand through his hair. "I thought he wanted distance from me, from the company, from everything." Elena's voice was barely audible. "You didn't know it was him at the diner." Julian shook his head. "My father never ate diner food," he said. "He hated anything that wasn't catered, and he always dressed like he had cameras on him." He swallowed hard. "When I saw him in the booth, I didn't recognize him. His posture, his voice, his eyes, I didn't think it could be him." Elena didn't respond. "Not yet." Julian's voice cracked for the first time. "You gave him dignity I didn't know how to give. You fed him, protected him, treated him like a person, while I was searching the city, thinking he was anywhere but right in front of me." Elena looked at him, tired, conflicted, hurting. "You could have told me who you were," she said. "I was ashamed," he admitted. "Being Julian Sterling closes doors just as often as it opens them. I didn't want to change the way you looked at me." He stepped closer, voice low, honest. "But if I'd known it was him, I would have moved heaven and earth to help him sooner." For a moment, silence filled the corridor. Soft, heavy, real. Then the alarm beeped across the hall. A nurse rushed past them. "Room 14, he's waking." Julian and Elena followed her inside. Arthur lay on the bed, tubes and wires surrounding him. Machines beeped in steady rhythm. But the man on the bed was not the same man Elena had fed every night. His eyes were open, clear, sharp, startling in their sudden awareness. He looked at Elena first. "You," he whispered, voice firm, not trembling. "You always put too many onions, but the sauce was good." Elena froze. Tears pressed against her eyelids, unexpected and overwhelming. Then Arthur turned to the doorway, where Julian stood frozen in place. His next words were strong enough to pierce the quiet. "Julian, stand up straight and fix your tie. You look like you crawled out of a hedge." Julian couldn't breathe. "Dad?" Arthur exhaled a long, slow breath. "Finally, you found me." Julian walked to him, gripping the bedrail, grounding himself. Arthur reached out a hand, placing it over Julian's. Then he reached for Elena's hand and placed it in Julian's. "You," Arthur said to his son, "you forget the value of people sometimes." She didn't. He shifted his gaze to Alina. She remembered I was human before I remembered it myself. Arthur rested back against the pillows. Elena, stay close to him. He'll lose himself if you don't. She swallowed hard. I didn't do anything special. You did everything, Arthur whispered. A moment later, the clarity faded. His eyelids fluttered. His breathing slowed. The doctor stepped in, checking the monitors, lowering his voice. He may not have long. Julian held his father's hand until it went still. Not gone, but quiet again. Lost again. And in that silence, grief found the shape it needed. The hours that followed felt slower, softer. Like the world was giving them space to process what had just broken open between them. When Arthur was stabilized and moved to another unit, Julian and Alina stepped into the hallway, both drained. Alina leaned against the wall. You lied to me. I did, Julian said, and I'm sorry. You could have told me earlier. I didn't know how. Every time I tried, you made me feel normal, and I haven't felt normal in years. She looked away, torn between disappointment and empathy. Julian stepped closer. Elena, you saved my father. You kept him alive. You were his home when he had none, and you didn't even know who he was. She blinked tears away, refusing to let them fall. That doesn't fix the fact that you hid the truth. It doesn't, he said, but I'll spend as long as it takes earning back your trust. She didn't forgive him. Not yet, but she didn't walk away either. And that was enough for now. 6 months later. The Night Owl diner looked different. The cracked tiles replaced, lights warmer, booths polished, and a small framed portrait near the entrance. Arthur's table, a community kitchen initiative, honoring the man who reminded us that kindness is a meal best shared. Elena stood behind the counter, not as a waitress, but as the owner. Her apron replaced by a simple blazer, her smile still the same. The bell above the door chimed. Julian walked in, the evening rain tapping lightly on his shoulders. He took his usual seat at booth 4, the same one where he had first realized his life would never be the same. Elena brought 2 plates, both porcelain, matching blue rose patterns, carefully restored. Too many onions? She teased softly. Julian smiled. Exactly the right amount. They ate together in the warm glow of the diner. 2 people who found each other through a storm, through loss, through a man who once wandered the city alone. Some stories begin with tragedy. Some begin with hope. Theirs began with a plate of meatloaf at 2 a.m. And in the quiet of the diner, beneath the hum of the neon sign, their future finally felt like a place they could both belong. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If Elena, Arthur, and Julian's journey moved you, inspired you, or simply stayed with you for a moment, I'm grateful you were here to witness it. If you'd like more stories filled with emotion, healing, and unforgettable turning points, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. More powerful stories are coming your way every day.